Thanks a lot, Mark, and also thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here. It's an honor because I'm on stage at one of the best web design and web development and design conferences in the world. And it's a pleasure because this is my first in-person conference since 2019. And I'm really glad that I get to share this moment here with you in Düsseldorf. My name is Manuel Matuzović. I'm a front-end developer from Vienna, and by day I work for the City of Vienna, and by night I work as an accessibility auditor and consultant. And when I do consulting, I work with all kinds of different companies, smaller companies, larger companies, institutions, universities, and they all have all kinds of different stacks. Some of their sites run PHP or on Python or on ASP.NET, whatever that is, and they have all kinds of different content management systems like WordPress or Kirby or Craft, and also some of them, of course, use JavaScript frameworks or libraries like Angular or React. And when my first client with a React stack approached me and asked me if I wanted to work with them to help them with their accessibility on the website, I was hesitant at first because I didn't know if I would be able to help them with their questions, because at that time I didn't know anything about React. But I thought about it, and then I just went for it and I said, yes, let's do it, because it was a nice client and I also wanted to really work on that project. And I thought if I put myself just under enough pressure, I would be able to learn all those things in React in order to help them with their accessibility. And a really nice way of putting yourself under pressure is to sign up for a React conference in Finland, get accepted, and give a talk in front of 500 React developers. On screen you can see me speaking at React Finland in Helsinki in 2019. My arms are wide open, you can just feel my confidence, and behind me is the beautiful React logo. And at some point the workshop came and I worked with the clients, and as it turns out I didn't talk too much about React. I mean, I talked about some things, but I mostly talked about HTML, and most of the questions and most of the issues were related to HTML. And this is something that all of my clients have in common, no matter the stack. Most of the questions and most of the issues are related to HTML. And it's funny because I already kind of knew that, but just didn't consider it or didn't think about it, because when I started to specialize in web accessibility in 2016, I read all the articles, everything there was. I read articles, I watched talks, I watched videos on YouTube, I took courses, just anything that I could get in order to learn how to build accessible websites. And after 2 years, I shared my first insights on a list apart. I wrote a post called My Accessibility Journey, What I've Learned So Far. And I shared these learnings and insights, and one of them was a solid knowledge of HTML solves a lot of problems. So I already knew that in 2018, but somehow I just thought that this doesn't apply to my clients. This doesn't apply to large companies with people who create products visited by thousands and thousands of people every day. I thought this only applies to, I don't know, beginners like me at the time. And when I thought about the early days of me getting into web accessibility, I also remembered how I started following web accessibility experts on Twitter. And I was surprised that they mostly shared basics, HTML basics on Twitter. And they did it over again, year after year. They share the same basics. And I was just wondering, when do you start to share the complicated accessibility stuff, the scary accessibility stuff, the stuff that I was so scared for so many years that I just thought, I'm too scared, so I'm just going to ignore that. I don't have to build accessible websites. When do you start to share that stuff? And they rarely do. And now, many years later, I see myself do the same things. I keep repeating the same basics over and over again, year after year. My friend Max Böck once jokingly said that it's fascinating how I was able to build a whole career based on a single HTML element, the button element, because I keep talking so much about this element. You can see a photo of me, my friend Matthias Ott took yesterday, and I'm holding a poster that says, a div is not a button. And I even have a website called The Button Cheat Sheet. I kind of created it as a joke, But it got shared so much because it was a valuable resource, and I'm sharing how to create a good button and how not to create a button, because a div is not a button. And I'm wondering, why? Why is it that we are not good at HTML? Why is it that the quality of most websites in terms of HTML markup is just so bad? And this after this language of existing for almost 30 years. You can see the very first publicly available HTML document published by Tim Berners-Lee 29 years ago. And I was thinking, how is it possible that after almost 30 years of hearing just how simple and how easy HTML is, that we are still so bad at writing HTML? So one day I had some time and I was sitting in my hotel room. You can see a photo of Bill Murray in the movie Lost in Translation. You can see him sitting on the bed of his hotel room looking depressed. So I was sitting in my hotel room and I was thinking about HTML. You know, the things that you do in a hotel room. And I was thinking about HTML and I was trying to come up with reasons why the quality of most websites is so bad, at least in terms of HTML. And I came up with some things and I want to share them with you today. And the very first thing is, we are not as good at writing HTML as we think we are. And I know what you're thinking. I am good at writing HTML, and I'm sure that some of you are. But the majority of us is really bad at writing HTML. You can see a main element on screen, and in this main element is a section. Nested in a section is a header, nested a section, an article, a section, a div, an article, and another section nested in this element. And I can say that we are bad at writing HTML because I'm an accessibility auditor. I get paid to assess the quality of documents. I look at a lot of code others have written. And I also have a website called htmhell.dev, where we take bad practices that we find on production websites, we put them on the website. Of course, we remove any traces to the people who build it. We don't want to blame or shame anyone. And we explain what's bad about the pattern, and we provide better solutions. And I also have this really shitty habit of not being able to surf the web. I don't enjoy surfing the web. I just can't surf the web properly because when I visit the website, I have to open DevTools and I just have to inspect that button and see if it's a div or a button. I don't enjoy surfing the web. And I'm sure that most of you are good at writing HTML. The language, the syntax. I'm sure that most of you understand that and know that. I'm also a teacher. I teach for more than 12 years, and usually it takes about 2 hours for me to teach beginners how to write HTML. It takes 2 hours for them to understand that there is a start tag, that there is an end tag, or there might not be an end tag, that you can put content between the start tag and the end tag, and that you might want to add an attribute and a value to a start tag. It takes about 2 hours for them to understand that, and after 2 hours they're able to create a basic document and write a structure. But that's not what I'm talking about. HTML is not just about the language, about the syntax. It's way more than that. It's about semantics. Yes, semantics. Semantics are important. But do you know why they're important? Do you know why it's important to use this element over that element? Did you know all the things that Leonie told us yesterday? And also, how many HTML elements do you know? How many are there? Don't shout it out, but just try to think of a number. 20? 50? 70? 100? 200? Some developers might say there are only 2 elements, and you only need 2 elements. And I've seen websites that only use these 2 elements. But of course, there are way more than that. If I counted correctly, there are 113 elements in HTML. How many of them do you know? Good question. Paul Foster asked this question, and he created the HTML text memory test. It's a super fun game. It's super simple. It consists of an input field, a button, a counter, and a list. And you add a tag name in the input field. If it exists, it will be added to the list and the counter goes down. It's a super fun game. It's highly addictive, so please don't play it now because I have really important things to say to you and I want you to listen to me. And please don't play it during the other talks because the other speakers have also important things to say. But definitely play it afterwards. And I would say, if you remember 50 tags, you're good. If you remember 70, you're really good. But there are 113. For Paul, there are 115 because he also included the SVG and the math element, just as a side note. Okay, so that's the first reason we're not as good at writing HTML as we think we are. The next reason is designers know too little about HTML. And now don't get me wrong, I really don't want to put this on designers and blame designers, but I just believe that a basic knowledge of the languages your designs will be translated to, so HTML and CSS, can be really helpful for you as a designer professionally, because then you get better at what you do. It can be good for you, for your team, for communication with developers, because it's just easier to communicate if you know more than just one language or the language the other person is speaking. And ultimately, it's better for your product and your users. And web development is about users. But admittedly, this is just one reason. It's not the most important or the most significant reason. It's just one. And I can imagine that some of you maybe don't like the things that I just said. And if you're not already typing, I would say now is a good time to log onto Elon Musk's website and complain about me and the things that I'm saying. Because the next reason is some people just don't care. Some people just don't give a flying fuck about accessibility and users. Here's an example. This is the main navigation of the website of a kind of well-known front-end JavaScript engineer. This is the navigation of his website, and it's a div with a class of nav. In this div, there is another div wrapped, and the two links are divs, so not A elements, but links with a JavaScript event. This is their main navigation. And this is someone who has more than 25,000 followers on Twitter, someone who gives talks, someone who writes articles, someone who's in the industry for many years. And you just can't tell me that they don't know that the A element exists or the nav element. And you can't tell me that they don't know what semantics are and how important it is and how important accessibility is. This is just not possible. They don't care. To be fair, this is their old navigation. They changed it recently. This is how it looks now. So they got rid. They got rid of one of the divs, but there's still this div with the class nav. They now have links, which is great, good for them. But unfortunately, they wrapped the content in a button within the link. But Leonie showed us yesterday how to do it. You use the nav element. If there are multiple nav elements on your website, you want to label them, for example, using ARIA label, and you want to structure the navigation using a list and proper links, and you can also highlight the current page using ARIA current. Okay. But I like to believe in the good in people, so I would say that most people do care, and all of you care, and this is only a minority of us developers who don't care. Okay, the next reason. We put too much trust and hope in ARIA. So when I audit a website, I have all kinds of different tools to assess the quality and the accessibility of a site, and one of these tools can tell me how many ARIA attributes are in the page. And when I see that there are like 200 or 300 or 400 ARIA attributes on a single page, I know that I'm going to have a bad time. Because we developers, we don't know how ARIA works. We are so bad at using ARIA, the whole specification and the attributes. We just don't understand what it does. And this is not just something that I'm saying based on my experience. There's data. So there is this nonprofit called WebAIM, and they have a website where they share all kinds of accessibility knowledge, and they have a testing tool called Wave, and they also create screen reader surveys, and they have this evaluation called the WebAIM 1 million. And since 2019, every year they test the top 1 million websites, and they run automated tests, and then they share what they found on these sites. And one thing they found was home pages with ARIA present averaged 70% more detected errors than those without ARIA. 70% more errors if there's ARIA on the page. It seems like developers are just randomly pouring ARIA attributes on websites and just hoping that magically somehow it turns into an accessible website. On screen is a photo of a chef with a comically huge bottle of oil, and he's pouring it into a salad, and I've labeled the chef full stack developer, the bottle ARIA, and the salad in quotes accessible website. And it's fine to use ARIA, use it, but please only use it if you understand what you're doing and if you are aware of the consequences. Leonie gave a fantastic example yesterday where she used the menu bar role, and she told you how she wouldn't be able to use it if it wasn't for the extra stuff that you had to add, the extra keyboard events and so on. And it's not, again, not just me who's telling you to not use ARIA if you don't understand it. It's in the spec. The spec authors have these 5 rules of ARIA, and they're saying if you can use a native HTML element or attribute with the semantics and behavior you require already built in, instead of repurposing an element and adding an ARIA role, state, or property to make it accessible, then do so. Wow, that was a heavy sentence. Or in other words, no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. So if you don't know what you're doing, just get rid of the stuff and use native HTML. Okay, so eventually I had to leave the hotel room because shit was getting expensive. I was there for weeks thinking about HTML. And so I left the hotel room, but I left it with a bad feeling. And it kind of didn't feel right. I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, it's true, we suck at writing HTML and some of us don't care, but there must be more to it. So I went back to the hotel room sometime later, and I was looking depressed and sitting on my bed, and I was thinking about HTML some more, and I tried to find more reasons. And at some point I figured that, the lack of knowledge is not the only cause, and also the lack of caring, of empathy is not the only cause. There must be something fundamentally wrong with the way we approach front-end development, with the way we build websites. And I only had this very fuzzy theory. There wasn't much substance. So I did some research. I looked again at the WebAIM 1 Million report. And on this report, they also list the most common issues that they found on these 1 million websites. And there are 6 of them, and there are low contrast text on more than 83% of websites, missing alternative text for images on more than 55% of websites, empty links on more than 50% of websites, missing labels for input fields on more than 46% of websites, empty buttons on more than 27%, and missing document language on more than 22% of websites. And I was looking at that and trying to understand it and try to get a feeling for the types of issues. And I did some more research. And this report was published a few weeks ago, and some developers responded to that. For example, my friend Hide de Vries, he wrote common accessibility issues that you can fix today. And he goes through this list of types of errors, and he explains how to fix them and where you can find tools and all the things that you should and you could do to avoid these things. Or there's an article by Christian Heilmann that it's titled 1 Million Broken Websites and a Way to Prevent That. And he goes into how you can use dev tools in Edge in order to fix these things and to debug them. And both posts are really great, so definitely check them out. I will share the slides with you later. Read this, it's really interesting. But the thing is, what they're doing is that they're repeating the same basics over and over again, year after year. And they're fighting the symptoms. They're not fighting the cause. And this is what we all do. We're all constantly fighting the symptoms and not the cause. And the thing is, it's hard to pinpoint the cause. I'm not sure if there's only one cause or if there are many reasons why we suck so much at HTML. And this is why I'm here. I'm just thinking. I'm just trying to sort the thoughts in my head, and I'm just trying to come up with a reason. I'm not sure if I will be able to do it today, but, I'm just sharing some things. Okay. So I looked again at the list of these most common issues, and I just ran again through this list, and I was like, okay, low contrast text. There are literally hundreds of tools that you can use in order to test that stuff. There are plugins for Sketch and Figma. There's built-in stuff in your browser, in DevTools. There are applications. There are websites. It's just, that stuff is avoidable. Missing alternative text. How often do you want to hear that you just use the alt attribute on an image? It has to be there all the time. If the content matters, you explain the image. If it doesn't matter, leave it empty, but just put an attribute there. Empty links, I mean, just add text. Missing form input labels. From the top of my head, I can come up with 4 different ways of labeling inputs. Empty buttons, same as links. A missing document language, I mean, you just put a language attribute on your document. And while I was thinking that, and especially when I'm saying that, I was like, whoa, hey, dude, that's pretty toxic behavior you're showing right now. You are standing here with your 22 years of experience writing HTML, 14 years of experience building professional websites, and 6 years being specialized in accessibility, and you are telling us that these things are easy and simple. That sucks, Manuel. That's not nice. And I'm right. That's not nice. And I'm wrong about these things. But I kept hearing for all my professional life how simple and how easy HTML is. But it's not. We are wrongfully downplaying the complexity of HTML due to the simplicity of its syntax. And what I mean by that is that it's pretty easy to learn the language for most people. But it's really hard to create a good document, a well-structured HTML document. And the thing is, there's more to HTML than just tags and attributes. HTML is about structuring a document, creating semantic relations between elements and parts of your document. It's about labeling content, it's about describing content, it's about describing state, it's about describing page changes. Super complex stuff. So again, I was looking at the list. And I tried to find something that they have in common. And I found one thing that 5 of these 6 things have in common. So I've included low contrast because this type of issue is a bit different. But the other 5, they have one thing in common, and that's that they're all related to something that isn't visible in a design, but it should be in a document. So when you look at the design, you should see those things even though they're not visible. And this brings me to the next reason. Accessibility issues don't just come from what's visible in a design, but from what's not visible. So there's a lot of stuff that should be in a document that we don't see, but we should see it. And let me try to explain what I mean by that. So let's look at the process of writing HTML. Let's talk about the process from idea to product, from design to code. Usually how it works is like this. We get a design, so we look at the design, and I call this the exploration phase. So we look at the design and we try to get a feeling for the design. We look at the colors and how they harmonize. We look at the type, the different typefaces and how they work together. We look at font sizes, line heights. We look at the fine nuances of a design, like shadows and lines and some playful little things that the designer put in there. We try to get a feeling for the visual hierarchy and how the whole thing works visually. And once we have that, we try to understand what all the things are supposed to do and what they mean and how they work. And we try to get an understanding of what we see. We interpret what we see in a design and try to get an understanding. And then we take that and then we start programming HTML. We take the things that we understood, the thing that we interpreted, that we saw in the design, and we translate that to code, to HTML. And when we take the first 2 things that I said, that we don't know enough about HTML and we don't care enough, then these are things that happen between the understanding and the development phase. So if I interpret the design and I don't know enough about the language, it's really hard to create a good translation. Here's another example. My parents are from Bosnia. They're born in Bosnia. I'm born in Austria. I speak Croatian, Bosnian, Serbian. It really doesn't matter if you ask me. It's pretty much the same language. I speak it, I've learned it, but I forgot most of it because, you know, most of my friends are Austrian and unfortunately I forgot the language. So if you give me a text in Croatian, I will be able to create a translation. But it will be a bad translation because my vocabulary is limited and I also don't know certain phrases and idioms and places and names. So there will be a translation, but a bad one. And this is similar in HTML. If you don't know about all the different semantic elements and the attributes, you won't be able to create a good translation. And you can understand and interpret as much as you want, but if you don't care, then the translation will also be bad. And now if we take the first thing, the last thing that I said, sorry, that there are things in a design that are not visible, but they should be in a document, then this is something that happens in the phase between exploration and understanding. So if we look at the design and there is something and we don't see it, it might happen that this thing might, wait for it, get lost in translation. Yeah. And these things have consequences, critical, serious consequences. If we don't build HTML documents properly, users might not be able to get a basic understanding of what your website is about, what they can do on this site, why are they here, what can they do on the thing that you built. They might not be able to get a good overview of all the items in the page. They might not be able to orientate, to understand where they are in the whole page or in one of the flows of your website. They might not be able to get the information that they need. They might not be informed of changes, like DOM changes in your page. And they might not be able to navigate. Okay. Now I want to try an exercise with you. I have a friend, I mentioned him earlier, Max Böck, and he designed the website. And he asked me, Manuel, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an engineer, I'm so busy, I don't have time to turn this design into HTML. Can you please help me, and can you please ask the Beyond Tellerrand crowd to help you? Would you help me turn some of the designs in HTML? Okay, let's do it. So let's first look at the design. This is the design in Figma. It could be in Sketch or XD or any other application. I mean, I've worked with InDesign, Word, but this is, it's Figma, but it doesn't matter. Let me just introduce you quickly to the design. So there's this introductory area at the very top of the page. You can see his portrait and his name. There are some links to other pages, and there is a circle with a paint roller. Is this the right word? I'm not sure. Paint roller. Let's call it paint roller. And then there is an intro area where it says, hello, my name is Max, I make websites. And below that, you have an area with the featured posts, the 8 featured posts, including a title and an image. And below that, you have another section with the most viewed posts, the 4 most viewed posts, and below that, the 4 most commented posts. And then there's a area that finalizes the page with some secondary links, an area where he brags about his perfect lighthouse score, and some more links. And now let's start with this. Let's look at this circle with the paint roller. And what I want you to do now is to think of the markup. Try to imagine what kind of markup do you need to create that thing. Don't shout it out, just think for yourself, but you have to be quick. We don't have much time. We only have 17 minutes and 26 seconds left. So look at that thing, and while you're doing that, I'm going to show you some other implementations I found on other websites for similar patterns. And maybe a quick explanation. So when you click that circle with the paint roller icon, a panel shows up. Then there are some buttons or radio buttons. And you can select the theme for the site, and then you can close the thing again. Don't worry about the panel. Just think about the circle and the icon and the fact that this opens this drawer with the different themes. A very minimal solution that I see often is this. So just an SVG. It's fine. You can do that. You can complete the visual task. You can create the circle and the icon, but the problem is that this circle and icon is an interactive element because you can click it, and if you can click something, you should be able to do the same thing using the keyboard. So if I would use the tab key and I try to focus this thing, this SVG, nothing would happen because it's not an interactive element. So we need an interactive element in order to make it keyboard accessible. So let's add a button. So I've wrapped the SVG in a div with the class button, and it now looks like a beautiful button, but unfortunately it's only visually a button. Semantically, it's just nothing. It's just a div. It's not interactive. Okay, let's replace that with a proper button. Nice. Much, much better, because now we have the visuals, and we also have an interactive element that's accessible using the keyboard, and it also provides the correct role. We heard that yesterday, so it would say button. But we don't know what kind of button this is because the label is missing, and every interactive element must have a label. Let me repeat that. Every interactive element must have a label. input fields, radio button, checkboxes, an iframe, buttons, links, they all must have a label. Let's add one. We can use, for example, ARIA label. So we put ARIA label on the button. This labels the button. There is no visual label, but for screen reader users, now it says button change theme. And if you want to, you can use ARIA hidden and put it on the SVG just to make sure that the SVG is not accessible to screen reader users, because they don't need this information. What they need is the knowledge that this is a button and that it has a label. Now this is pretty good for most, I would say, but it's not perfect. And there are also other ways of labeling. For example, you could just put text in the button. This would be my favorite because this would work for everyone. It works for screen readers because there's a label, but it also works for sighted users because they see what this icon means and what it's supposed to do. But, okay, of course, if the design demands it, you can also wrap this text in a span and use a screen reader only or visually hidden class to hide it visually while still maintaining accessibility. Unfortunately, there is no native way in HTML or CSS to do that, so you have to combine a bunch of different CSS properties to achieve that. This is almost perfect, and one thing is missing, and it's the fact that the button controls the panel, and the button is responsible for communicating to the user that they are in control of the panel. And we can do that by using the ARIA expanded attribute. So if you put ARIA expanded on the button, it will announce something like button change theme collapsed because the panel is collapsed. And if you click it, you change the value of ARIA expanded to true, and then it will say something like button change theme not collapsed or open. I don't remember right now. This is important. And we can also add the ARIA controls attribute and add some more semantics, because this now creates a semantic relationship between the button and the panel it controls, and it provides additional ways to interact with this component. This doesn't work with all screen readers and browsers, but you could add it. It would be a nice additional feature. Okay, so the perfect button for me is a focusable interactive element, the button element usually. It has an accessible name, it has a role of button, it might communicate state or something else. Yesterday we saw ARIA pressed, for example, a different attribute, and it might also communicate a relationship if it makes sense. This is how it looks like when the panel is open, so you can see the different themes, and you can select the theme, and you can also close it. And let me just quickly talk about this one, the close button, because this is one of the most controversial patterns in all of web design. Every other website that I look at does this pattern wrong because it's so complicated. We all now have the knowledge how to create a close button. We know it must be an interactive element, it must have a label, and it also must communicate the state. And sometimes you see this, and this looks pretty okay, I would say. The only thing that I don't like about this is the label. The label is X. I can imagine that in English you could probably say to X something, like to get rid of it, to close it. So this would work fine. The problem here is now, this is not an X. This is the icon for times, as in 2 times 2 or 3 times 4. Or in some screen readers, it might say multiplication sign. And this doesn't make sense at all. And you see this on many, many websites. If you want to use it, fine. Just wrap it in a div, use ARIA hidden to exclude it from accessibility, from the accessibility tree, and use a proper text label. Okay, nice. So we have got that, fine. The next task for you is please look at the design and try to come up with how many headings there are on this page. Max asked me to create a document outline with you. So how many headings do you see in this page? Some of you might see 1 heading, others might see 4, maybe 20 headings. Before I tell you how many headings I see, I quickly want to talk about wild bees. One day I was sitting on my couch and I was watching TV, and usually when I watch TV, I'm like super passive. I'm in this apathetic state. I'm just lying there, aging slowly and not paying attention to what's on TV. But one day there was this documentary about wild bees, and I remember all of a sudden I was wide awake, and I was sitting on my couch looking at the TV, and I was screaming, "Fuck me, how awesome are wild bees? What's going on? How awesome are these creatures, and what are they doing to this snail shell? What's happening? They are so awesome, and they're just so beautiful." And I absorbed every information they gave me about wild bees. I was just so amazed by these creatures. So the next day, I went to the next local bookstore, and I said, yo, you have to hook me up with the best book about wild bees. It's important. And the store clerk said, okay, no problem, bro. I've got you covered. Here it is. And I was like, wow, this is a huge book, and it has almost 500 pages. And I'm really not sure if I want to buy that. And then... And then I wanted to figure out if this is the right book for me, because I didn't just want an index of all the bees in the world. I wanted to learn something about them, how they build their nests, how they communicate, how they interact with nature. So I opened page 3 and I looked at the index. This is in German, but it doesn't matter. It's just an index of all the chapters and sub-chapters of the book. And I was looking at it and I was like, oh, okay, there's something about nest building, there's something about the way they communicate, and there's also an index of the most important bees in Europe. And I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to buy that. That's all the information I need. I didn't have to open the book and browse through the book to learn if that was interesting to me. I just had to look at the index. And we can do the same thing on the web using headings. So if we create a nice heading structure, this is a really great way for sighted users to get an idea of how your page is structured. They don't have to read everything. They can just browse through the page and look at the headings and get a feeling for how the page is structured and what the different sections are about. And especially for screen reader users, this can be really helpful if you have a nice structure, because if you use a screen reader, you don't just necessarily have to read all the contents on the page. You have all kinds of different shortcuts to interact with the page. And one of them is to just list all the headings. You can see here, I have VoiceOver. I'm running VoiceOver on macOS, the built-in screen reader, and I'm listing all the headings. It's just such a nice way to get an overview. I'm on the Beyond Tellerrand website, and you can see there is an H1, and then the larger sections have H2s, and there are subsections with H3s, and this is not the real document outline. I changed it in the DevTools. Marco will have to talk about your headings later. But it's just such a... It's just such a nice way to get an overview, and I can use the arrow keys and select the heading and jump directly into that chapter without having to interact with the rest of the page. And if we look at Max websites, if there's just one heading, I mean, it's okay, better than no heading, but there is structure on this page. There are some sections, some larger sections, so just a single heading wouldn't be enough if you ask me. So I see one H1. This is the main heading of the site. It describes the page. Then I see an H2 for the featured posts. It's not visible in the design, but it should be there. It makes sense to add it to the document. And I see one for the most viewed posts and one for the most commented posts. And this is now how it looks like. And let me just quickly play a video of me using VoiceOver on macOS.
Heading level 1, I make websites. Heading level 2, featured posts. Heading level 2, most viewed posts. Heading level 2, most commented posts.
I'm sorry, I messed up the recording. It's not loud enough, but you can hear that it announces the level. Thank you. It announces the level of the heading and also the text within that heading. So if you create a sound document outline, it means that you use meaningful labels. You describe the sections properly. You don't put just crap in your headings because of SEO or some other reason. Describe what each section is about. Create a clean hierarchy, which means that you try to avoid skipping levels. So you start with one H1, and then you have H2s, and if you have subsections, you use H3s, and so on. And you use enough, but not too many headings, because if everything is a heading, nothing is. So really think about the index and wild bees when you create your structure. Okay, the next task Max wants us to solve is landmarks. He wants us to identify all the landmarks in this page, so all the important areas of this site. And what I see is a header. Nice. I see a nav element. I see a main element. And a footer. And why is this important? Again, this is another way of navigating on the website. Screen reader users can list all the landmarks on the page and jump directly into them. Just imagine how nice it is that you don't have to interact with the header at all. You just open this shortcut, you just press the shortcut, and you jump directly into the main content. Super convenient.
Landmarks menu.
Yeah, so you can see that the banner landmark is the header, navigation is the navigation.
Main. Navigation.
Main is the main element, and content information is the footer. And you can directly jump into a landmark. Okay, so the next task. Max told us to properly identify the natural language of this page. You can see it's written in English, but Max, just like me, is also from Vienna, and he speaks German. So you might be tempted to define the natural language of his site as German, because he speaks German. And if you do that, it can have really serious and bad consequences. So if you have an HTML document and you want to define the natural language of the site, you use the language attribute. And if you set it to DE, this means, this is short for Deutsch, which means German in German, then you identify the natural language of the page as German. But if you set it to FR, it's French, and EN is English. And this is really important that you get that right. So if Max's website is written in English, you have to set the value of the language attribute to English. And this has all kinds of consequences. For example, screen readers, they might pick the voice the screen reader is using based on this attribute. So if we are on Max's website, it's written in English, the language attribute is set to German, a screen reader might look at the language attribute and say, hey, this is German, so I'm going to switch to the German voice, and then it will read the content on the page and pronounce it in German. So the screen reader will just sound like me, and you don't want that. You want someone who pronounces stuff properly in British English or American English or Scottish or Irish, whatever it is, but you don't want them to pronounce it like I do. The language attribute has an effect on hyphenation in CSS, on quotation marks, on translation, on spell checking, and on the default font selection for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages. Here's an example. 2 years ago in Vienna, we went to the polls and to vote for a new municipal government. And we voted, and usually at around 5 p.m., the largest news site in Austria publishes the first results. And they did that on this Sunday, and they categorized the results by district. In Vienna, we have 23 districts, and they all have names. And they published the results, and shortly after, first people started complaining about the names of the districts being wrong. And the developers looked at the site, and they were like, I don't know, works on my machine, it's fine. But then they investigated, and as it turns out, they were using Vue CLI, and Vue CLI comes with some boilerplate code, and by default, the language attribute is set to English. So they published this German site written in German with the language attribute set to English, and the people complaining were users of Chrome, users who instructed Google Translate to automatically translate English content to German. And there were 2 districts. The 11th district is Simmering. Simmering is just a name in German or in Austria, but it means something in English. And so Google translated Simmering to Sieden, because that's the translation of to simmer, simmering. And the 23rd district is called Leasing. Leasing, again, just a name. And what happened here is, I think that Google Translate thought that it was a typo, that they meant to say lying, and that's why they translated it to lügen, which means to lie in German. So you can see that the language attribute is really powerful, and it has many consequences. Okay. I only have 2 minutes, so I'm approaching the end of my talk. There are, of course, many more things that are not visible in a design, but that should be in a document. But I don't have enough time to show you more of these things. And yes, I will wrap this up with some advice. I'm not going to talk again about how to create buttons or lists and repeat the same basics over and over again year after year. I just did that, kind of, but I don't want to do it again, so I will leave you with a bit of a different advice. Developers, prioritize HTML. When you work on a design, talk with your designer about what you see, but also what the things are about that you see. Try to identify together with your designers, with your team, what the things in this design mean, what they do, and how they might change as users interact with those things. This is important. Spend time working on the design in terms of semantics. And when you start to develop HTML first. Write all the HTML, create a beautiful HTML document, and check if the site works in HTML. And then you might even validate the HTML, if you know what that is. And you can also, if you want to run an accessibility test, just to make sure that the first draft is fine. And when you got all that, then you write CSS. And if you're super fun, you might even add some JavaScript if you want to. If it makes sense for the user. If it doesn't make sense, just write HTML and CSS. You're fine. thank you. This is one of the most important things that I can advise developers and designers to do. Learn who your users are and how they're using the web. The web is more than just using a mouse and touch. There's so many different ways of using the web. And when it clicked for me, this whole accessibility thing, was when I just watched videos of how people use the web. And if you know that, it's much easier to create accessible products. If you know all these things, how they interact with sites, it's much easier to consider all the things that you need in order to create a great product. And please stop belittling HTML. It's not simple, it's not easy, it's a complex, it's an extensive language. This one is also important. Universities, schools, teachers, course coordinators, prioritize HTML. Teach it properly. Don't just teach the language, the syntax. Teach semantics and accessibility. Tell your students why it's important to create semantic HTML, why it's important to use this element over that element, and what kind of difference it makes to put an attribute on an element. And if you don't have the knowledge, get some budget and invite experts and allow them to teach you how to teach HTML properly. And rewrite your curriculums. These things don't work. I'm especially talking to you boot camp creators. People who promise beginners that they will turn them from zero to JavaScript or a frontend ninja in 8 weeks. I know that you believe that it's important to know how to write JavaScript and React in order to get a job. I know that you believe that, but it's more important to create accessible documents and allow people to use your documents. You have to teach your students how to build accessible websites and allow people to access the content and allow people to participate in society. This is what it's about. This is what web development is about. Authors, prioritize HTML. Don't be ashamed and don't be afraid to talk about HTML. It's not just the basics. Who wants to hear the basics? I just talked about basics, and I feel pretty confident with my talk today. So don't be ashamed to talk about HTML. Please, go out there and speak and write about HTML. And please don't write one of these shitty, clickbaity, 10-element, you've never heard of articles. Nobody wants to hear that. Write a proper deep dive. Take a single attribute, take a single element, and write everything and research everything you know about this element. And remember, markup is your friend. We heard that yesterday. When you write an article about CSS or about JavaScript, use accessible HTML in your demos. Even if it's not about the HTML, make sure that you're not just using random divs. Use proper HTML. You might even add some side notes and explain why you're using this and that element. And please learn how to test your sites with automatic testing tools. When we look again at the Web A1 Million report that I cited, they found automatically detectable issues on 96.8% of these 1 million websites. That's quite a lot, I would say. And these things are detectable. You use accessibility insights or XDev tools or Lighthouse or Wave. You press a button and they will show you all of these errors. Learn how to do that. And please, if possible, you would make me really happy, learn how to test your sites with the keyboard and screen readers. It takes some time, yes. It's complicated, especially the screen reader part. But try to learn that stuff. It will help you, it will help your users, it will help your products. Okay, that's it. That's all I have to say today. Are there more things that might be a reason why the quality of our markup is so bad? I'm pretty sure that there are more things, and there are also definitely more things more advice that I have for you, but that's all I have for now. I don't know more at the moment. I just guess I have to go back to my hotel room and do some thinking and think about HTML. But for now, all I have to say is thank you so much for watching and enjoy the rest of the conference.